What does it really mean to be vulgar? Is it a crime or a challenge to power? In old Hollywood, some actresses shattered taboos with every curve, smirk, and line of dialogue, earning labels meant to shame, but instead igniting legends. These 20 women didn't just push boundaries and they rewrote them. Stick around because number 11 still shocks censors to this day. Let's dive into the boldest icons who dared to be too much for their time. Mamie Van Doren. Imagine a 1950s drive-in under the stars. Engines idling, soda fizzing, and there she is, Mamie Van Doren, rocking and rolling in untamed youth. The film was a mix of chain gangs, rebellion, and teen lust. Critics dismissed it as corny fluff, but emphasized one word louder than all: vulgar. Universal Studios molded Mamie as a Monroe-Mansfield hybrid and told her to show the curve every chance you get. She delivered, often donning sweaters so tight they seemed stitched with scandal. Church groups warned teenagers her movies glamorized sin and delinquency. But off-screen, Mamie was the opposite of her image. She read newspapers, performed for troops in Vietnam, and never missed Sunday services. She once quipped, "Delinquent? I never even got a parking ticket, just hearts." Still, the label clung to her name like sequins to spandex. Later in life, Mamie leaned into the joke, appearing in documentaries on 1950s censorship with a wink. She knew her brand was never about nudity, it was about nerve. Her studio assigned her a champagne gold convertible for photo ops and expected her to blow kisses like they printed money. And she did. Today, her vulgar wiggle looks more like a cheeky curtsy to a puritanical era desperate to control its desires. Mamie proved you could wear tight clothes, tell naughty jokes, and still be the smartest person in the room, if you dared to drive the story instead of being driven by it. Marlene Dietrich. When Marlene Dietrich sauntered onto American screens in the early 1930s, she wasn't just crossing the Atlantic. She was crossing gender lines, moral borders, and the fragile comfort zones of Hollywood censors. In Morocco, she wore a tuxedo, kissed a woman on the lips, and tipped her hat to a stunned crowd. That one gesture sent state censors into chaos. In Shanghai Express, she wore gorilla sleeve gowns and delivered lines that simmered with innuendo. Critics howled. Papers called her vulgar. The Catholic Legion of Decency labeled her immoral. And Dietrich? She simply lit another cigarette and said, "Clothes have no sex." She never chased respectability. At dinner parties, she served caviar with German sausages. She performed in foxholes during World War II, wearing her signature suits while soldiers clung to every word. She blurred every line they tried to draw for her. Her style wasn't just sexual, it was subversive. Vulgarity for her was a weapon, and when they tried to use it against her, she made it glamorous. She transformed what Hollywood considered indecent into elegance. Dietrich never begged to be accepted. She forced the world to catch up. In the end, the woman once labeled vulgar became a legend not in spite of the scandal, but because she danced through it in heels no one else dared wear. Bettie Page. Bangs cut like rebellion, a bikini made of leopard print, and a grin that confused a generation. Bettie Page wasn't just a pinup. She was an atom bomb in a sweater set. In the 1950s, when modesty ruled calendars and morals, Bettie posed in lace, leather, and chains. The press called her vulgar. The U.S. Senate called her dangerous. In 1957, a committee aired her bondage-themed shorts during an obscenity hearing, and suddenly this cheerful Southern girl with a whip became a national scandal. But Bettie didn't see it that way. She said she was just modeling, following directions, doing a job. Off camera, she volunteered at church, baked cookies for neighbors, and once said she found the Bible more scandalous than her photos. Her duality baffled the public. How could someone so kind, so ordinary, wear fishnets and laugh while doing it? After disappearing into religious life and suffering mental health crises, she re-emerged in the 90s as a cult icon. Fans now call her empowering. Vintage shops sell her smile on coffee mugs. Her legacy? That vulgarity is often a shadow cast by misunderstanding. Bettie Page wasn't a threat. She was a mirror, reflecting our fears about freedom, pleasure, and the power of a woman who could grin through judgment and still look divine. Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow didn't walk onto the screen, she shimmered. MGM made sure of that. They bleached her hair to a platinum so blinding it looked radioactive under studio lights. Then they wrapped her in silk slips and told her to be irresistible. She obliged. In Red-Headed Woman, she seduces a married boss, punches his wife, and locks herself in for a night of scandal, all with a glint in her eye. Critics screamed. Newsweek called her the girl who made sin shimmer. Her slang-heavy delivery, full of suckers and big boys, drew protests. That wasn't how women were supposed to speak, but Harlow wasn't interested in being polite. She laughed when called vulgar, saying, "Yesterday they called me worse." She knew the power of contradiction. On screen, she was dangerous. Off screen, she was gentle, cracking jokes and showing up to set early with coffee in hand. Her nightclub escapades made headlines, but co-stars adored her. She confused people because she dared to be both kind and carnal, soft and scandalous. When she died tragically at 26, that contradiction froze in time. Jean Harlow wasn't vulgar. She was just ahead of her moment, and the world never quite caught up. Clara Bow. Clara Bow was never supposed to happen. A Brooklyn girl raised in poverty, she had no pedigree, no polished diction, and no interest in acting like a lady. But when she hit the silent screen, audiences didn't care. Because Clara had it, that elusive mix of charisma and chaos. In it, she pounced into frame, laughed too loud, and kissed like she meant it. Critics called her wild. Parents called her vulgar. Church groups handed out pamphlets warning that she glamorized sin and flapper excess. But Clara was a tidal wave. She danced at the Coconut Grove, raced cars down Sunset Boulevard, and posed in bathing suits without stockings. Scandalous at the time. She didn't play demure. She didn't whisper. She lived. Off camera, the gossip was relentless. Tales of love triangles, public outbursts, and backstage affairs, some real, most exaggerated, fed the public's obsession. When sound films arrived, her thick Brooklyn accent became a punchline. Hollywood called her too vulgar for dialogue. She left the screen and the spotlight behind. Years later, historians saw the truth. Clara Bow wasn't vulgar. She was authentic, and for a society terrified of real women with real appetites, that was the most shocking thing of all. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth never needed to strip. She just removed one glove. In Gilda, that single satin peel drove censors wild. The camera lingered. Her hips swayed. And for a moment, America held its breath. She didn't take off much, but the suggestion, that was enough. Parent groups protested. Life magazine called it legendary. The Catholic Legion of Decency labeled it vulgar. During World War II, soldiers pinned her in lace on barracks walls. Some chaplains argued it lowered morale because it raised everything else. But Rita was no overnight scandal. She'd trained in dance for years, born Margarita Cancino, practicing until her shoes tore. She hated the love goddess label, once confessing, "Men go to bed with Gilda, but wake up with me." Off-screen, she was shy, often struggling with depression and later Alzheimer's. But the myth was locked in that glove, that slow, hypnotic reveal. It wasn't nudity, it was suggestion, crafted so perfectly that it offended precisely because it was restrained. Rita Hayworth became the embodiment of how little it took for Hollywood to call a woman vulgar. One glove, one look, one moment that made film history and changed the meaning of allure forever. Hedy Lamarr. Before she became the mind behind the wireless technology that powers your Wi-Fi, Hedy Lamarr was making headlines for an entirely different reason: nudity. In Ecstasy, she appeared skinny dipping and, more scandalous still, acted out an orgasm on screen. European censors squirmed. Vatican papers called it vulgar art. When she arrived in Hollywood, MGM boss Louis B. Mayer warned reporters, "Yes, she was in a naughty picture, but here she'll be a lady." But Lamarr never forgot what it meant to scandalize. Her American films like Algiers and Samson and Delilah still simmered with forbidden glamour. Off-screen, she was even more dangerous, talking openly about sex, power, and science in an era when women were supposed to whisper. During World War II, she co-invented a frequency hopping system to guide torpedoes, technology the Navy ignored, but later became the backbone of Bluetooth. Reporters asked her about husbands and hairdos instead. She once said, "Any girl can be glamorous. All she has to do is stand still and look stupid." But Hedy didn't stand still, and she was never stupid. She was labeled vulgar early on and never shook the tag. But history redeemed her. Now her name sits at the intersection of genius and scandal, a reminder that society often fears brilliance when it comes wrapped in beauty. Jayne Mansfield. If Marilyn Monroe was champagne, Jayne Mansfield was a bottle of shaken soda, sweet, explosive, and impossible to ignore. She didn't just flirt with the line of decency, she plowed right through it. At a Hollywood dinner party, she accidentally spilled out of her low-cut dress, and the flashbulbs never stopped. Tabloids dubbed her the Queen of Wardrobe Malfunctions, though the term back then was far more brutal. Vulgar. In The Girl Can't Help It, milk bottles exploded at the sight of her curves. Subtlety wasn't part of the script. Britain banned her cabaret act, and the Catholic Legion of Decency went into crisis mode when she starred in Promises. Promises, the first Hollywood film with a nude major star. Jayne didn't care. She traveled with a heart-shaped bathtub and a chihuahua named Galena Houdini. Beneath the pink spotlight, however, was a brain that read philosophy and spoke 5 languages. Reporters who expected a dumb blonde got Socrates with a sex appeal twist. But Hollywood never forgave her for being clever and carnal at the same time. They kept the vulgar label glued to her name. When she died in a horrific car crash at just 34, the headlines focused on the curves, not the woman. But for those who knew better, Mansfield was the first to prove that a so-called vulgar woman could also be the sharpest one in the room. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was a paradox dressed in satin. To millions, she was innocence dipped in seduction. But behind every shimmering gown was a woman at war with the word vulgar. In 1951, she wore a gold lame dress so tight she had to be lifted onto her chair. Critics called it cheap. Columnist Earl Wilson labeled her indecent. She responded by posing in a potato sack, cheekily asking, "Is this more appropriate?" In Niagara, her slow-motion walk, just a walk, was nearly censored for being too suggestive. In Some Like It Hot, beaded dresses clung like second skin, igniting protests. Off-camera, she studied Dostoevsky, joined acting workshops, and desperately sought roles with depth. But interviews always circled back to one thing: sex appeal. Monroe sighed. "A sex symbol becomes a thing, and I just hate being a thing." Hollywood used her body but ignored her mind. They labeled her vulgar when she took control of her image. And yet she redefined screen sensuality, not by accident, but by design. She was both the mirror and the illusion, the joke and the punchline. Monroe's tragedy wasn't that she was misunderstood. It's that she understood everything and played along, knowing the game was rigged from the start. Brigitte Bardot. Sunlight, sand, and a barefoot dance. Brigitte Bardot in And God Created Woman wasn't just a performance, it was a cultural detonation. French sunshine collided with Catholic fury. The Vatican condemned it. U.S. mayors threatened bans. Headlines screamed vulgar, while moviegoers lined up for a glimpse. Bardot didn't just act, she radiated freedom. She sunbathed topless when it was still considered criminal in many countries. Her lovers, marriages, and unapologetic nudity scandalized traditionalists, but Bardot shrugged it off. "I am immaculate. I have nothing to hide." Variety labeled her the face of vulgar cinema. She became a muse, a menace, and a mystery. Yet her best work, like Contempt, revealed a soul layered with vulnerability. She showed that sensuality didn't mean stupidity. As the 70s arrived, Bardot turned from sex goddess to animal rights activist, battling fur traders with the same fury she once used against prudish norms. The woman once accused of corrupting morals became a voice for voiceless creatures. And in that evolution lies the truth. Bardot's vulgarity wasn't vulgar at all. It was the refusal to let anyone dictate how a woman should move, speak, or love. Sharon Stone. One-leg cross. Just one. And Sharon Stone became cinema's most controversial figure overnight. In Basic Instinct, she played Catherine Trammell, a character as cool as she was carnal. During a police interrogation, Stone crossed her legs and the world lost its mind. Critics called it sleaze. State censors debated banning the entire film. Theaters slapped adult-only warnings on posters. For a scene lasting seconds, Stone, at the time still rising, wasn't asked about the plot or performance. She was grilled about morality. But she defended the moment. It was power, she argued. A woman owning the room, reversing the gaze. Still, the vulgar tag stuck. Her roles in Sliver and Casino only amplified the debate. Off-screen, she was brilliant, witty, and deeply involved in brain injury awareness after surviving a stroke. But the industry and the press kept defining her by a single cinematic flashbulb moment. Over time, Stone turned the narrative. Her story became one of endurance, intelligence, and reclaiming the spotlight. Because vulgarity, in her case, wasn't about exposure, it was about the fear of a woman who knew how to use it. Monica Bellucci. When Irreversible premiered at Cannes in 2002, some audience members fled their seats. Others shouted at the screen. Monica Bellucci had just portrayed a victim in one of cinema's most harrowing scenes. So raw, so realistic, it branded the entire film as unwatchable, cruel, and above all, vulgar. Bellucci stood her ground. The violence, she said, was meant to confront, not titillate, but the backlash clung to her like perfume. Even her earlier films, like Milena, where she played a war widow idolized and vilified for her beauty, had drawn outrage for scenes that dared to show sensuality through the female lens. Fluent in French, Italian, and English, Bellucci quoted Camus at press junkets and refused to conform to anyone's expectations of how a gorgeous woman should behave. Yet vulgarity followed her, not because of her actions, but because of society's unease with power in a beautiful package. Today, critics reevaluate Irreversible as a brutal work of art. Bellucci, in heels or bare feet, never apologized for the roles she chose. She forced audiences to reckon with their discomfort. And in doing so, she proved that sometimes vulgarity is just honesty the world isn't ready for. Elizabeth Berkley. When Showgirls hit theaters in 1995, critics didn't just review the film, they attacked it like a cultural virus. Elizabeth Berkley, once the sweet-faced teen from Saved by the Bell, was suddenly Hollywood's poster girl for vulgarity. Neon-lit strip clubs, explicit scenes, and exaggerated drama had senators debating film ratings. Berkley's performance, full of ambition and wild-eyed energy, was dismissed as tasteless, obscene, even career suicide. But beneath the chaos was a serious commentary on exploitation and power. Nobody cared. She became a punchline overnight. Late-night hosts joked. Studios went silent. Yet Berkley didn't disappear. She reinvented herself on Broadway and cabaret and as a mentor for young performers. She launched self-esteem programs and publicly defended risk-taking in art. Over time, Showgirls gained cult status. What once horrified critics is now studied in film classes. The word vulgar faded, replaced with visionary for daring to challenge comfort zones. Berkley didn't just survive the storm, she outlived it, proving that vulgarity often reveals more about those who shout it than those who bear the label. Madonna. In 1993's Body of Evidence, Madonna didn't just act, she wielded wax, handcuffs, and a raw sexuality that earned her an NC-17 rating. Critics called the film obscene. Newspapers ran headlines like Madonna drags Hollywood into the gutter. But for Madonna, controversy wasn't new. It was currency. A year earlier, she'd released SEX, a provocative coffee table book that caused bookstore boycotts and record sales spikes. She knew exactly what she was doing. Still, the vulgar label haunted her every step into film. The press ignored her quieter roles in Desperately Seeking Susan or A League of Their Own, focusing instead on lace bodysuits and boundary-pushing behavior. Madonna defended her choices as art, explorations of female power and desire. Men do it all the time, she argued. Why can't I? Today, Body of Evidence seems tame compared to streaming-age erotica. Yet its legacy lingers because Madonna didn't just play roles, she shattered cages. Her name remains a warning and a beacon. that vulgarity is often just confidence in a key the world isn't ready to hear. Raquel Welch. Raquel Welch didn't need dialogue to make headlines, just a fur bikini. In 1,000,000 years BC, she barely spoke, yet her poster broke records in teenage hearts. The image defined her, part prehistoric fantasy, part modern taboo. Critics scoffed. Variety called it primitive. Others preferred a different term, vulgar. In Myra Breckenridge, she flipped gender norms and shocked everyone with risque satire. Time magazine said it redefined tastelessness. Raquel bore the brunt of the fallout, yet she kept going. In The Three Musketeers, she delivered physical comedy with timing to rival Chaplin. Off-screen, she spoke openly about double standards. If men can show bare chests, why can't I show shoulders? She launched fitness videos, appeared on talk shows, and charmed late-night hosts with wit and wisdom. Yes, her looks launched 1,000 headlines. But behind the fur and flair was a woman who challenged the rules, not just played by them. Welch proved you could be a sex symbol, a punchline, and still walk away with dignity, and an entire era watching. Angelina Jolie. Before her humanitarian accolades and political speeches, Angelina Jolie lit up the screen in Original Sin, a period drama so steamy it left critics fanning themselves. Candlelight, sweat, and exposed skin led reviewers to label the film, and Jolie, vulgar excess. But the judgment didn't stop there. Jolie's real-life antics, tattoos, vials of blood exchanged with lovers, raw interviews, fed a media frenzy. She was portrayed as Hollywood's most dangerous woman. Yet beneath the tabloid headlines was a fierce intelligence and unshakable will. Jolie directed war films, adopted children from conflict zones, and lobbied the UN with the same fire she brought to every role. The vulgarity label, once used to shame her, became meaningless in the face of global change. Jolie's arc wasn't about redemption, it was about reclamation. She taught the world that sensuality and social activism can exist in the same woman. And sometimes the most vulgar thing you can do is refuse to be silent. Kim Basinger. Dim lights, soft jazz. Melted ice licked from trembling fingers. In 9.5 weeks, Kim Basinger gave a performance that polarized Hollywood. Critics called it softcore porn disguised as art. Churches warned congregations. Some theaters refused to screen it. The word vulgar spread like wildfire. But Basinger defended the film, calling it an emotional opera. She was tired of ingenuous roles. She wanted to explore real desire, and she paid for it. Her follow-up roles were scrutinized. Then came her biggest gamble, buying the town of Braselton, Georgia, to build a film studio. The press mocked her. Financial troubles followed. She lost the town, but not her will. In 1997, she stunned Hollywood with an Oscar win for LA Confidential. Her role, a call girl with dignity, beauty, and quiet strength. It was the perfect revenge. Kim Basinger's story proves that being labeled vulgar is often the first sign you're on the right path to reinvention. Theda Bara. Before Hollywood found its voice, Theda Bara whispered with her eyes, and the world called it evil. Born Theodosia Goodman, the studios rebranded her as Theda Bara, supposedly an anagram for Arab death. In 1915's A Fool There Was, she reclined in furs, beckoning a married man to ruin. A single intertitle read, "Kiss Me, My Fool," and audiences gasped. Church bulletins decried her image as satanic. Her movie posters featured her draped in snakeskins, posed with skulls and crucifixes. Bara didn't even speak on screen, yet she terrified the moral majority. Small-town theaters banned her films. Critics dubbed her America's first screen temptress, too vulgar for the pulpit, too fascinating to ignore. Off-camera, she was quiet, respectful, even shy, but her myth was too potent. She became the vamp, a term still used for women deemed dangerously attractive. Most of her films were lost in a fire, but her impact endures. Theda Bara proved that even in silence, a woman's allure could shake the very foundations of decency. Mae West. Before censorship had a name, Mae West had a punchline. She didn't whisper sweet nothings. She dropped double entendre like bombs. In the 1930s, she wore tight satin, strutted like a queen, and delivered lines dripping in playful sin. Her play Diamond Lil in films like She Done Him Wrong set off national alarms. Church leaders demanded bans. The newly formed production code pointed to her as the reason Hollywood needed moral guardrails. A Boston radio station even cut her comedy sketch for sounding too suggestive. But West never apologized. "Censorship made me rich," she said. "Every complaint brought more people to the box office." She turned criticism into marketing gold. Off stage, she was sharp, calculating, and fully in control of her image. Her legacy. That vulgarity is often just the courage to say what others won't. Mae West didn't break the rules. She rewrote them in red lipstick. Pamela Anderson, red swimsuit, blonde hair, slow motion. Pamela Anderson wasn't just a Baywatch icon. She was the embodiment of every 1990s fantasy. But critics didn't see a woman. They saw a spectacle, a punchline, a walking, bouncing piece of primetime vulgarity. When she starred in Barbed Wire and Raw Justice, reviewers dismissed the films before the credits rolled. And yet, Anderson wasn't content to be reduced. Off-screen, she campaigned for animal rights, addressed legislative bodies, and revealed her childhood traumas and media manipulation in later memoirs. Still, the press latched onto bikinis and scandals. Vulgarity, it seemed, was her sentence. But Pamela reclaimed it. She used the spotlight to speak for causes, not just curves. She proved that beauty, even when monetized, doesn't erase depth. Her story is a warning and a rally cry. That when a woman controls her own image, the world will call her vulgar, but history might call her something else entirely. Fearless. From silent vamps to scandal-soaked sirens, these women weren't vulgar. They were revolutionary. Each challenged the rules of beauty, speech, and power. And every gasp, protest, and censor's cut only made them more unforgettable. Because in Hollywood, sometimes the loudest word for freedom is vulgarity.